Hi, all. Good evening to all of you. Hope all are healthy and safe at your end. Myself, Chirida, currently the Joint Secretary of Progressive Student Forum, TISS Mumbai. Uh, on behalf of PSF, I'm officially welcoming you all to the third edition of Godavari Parulekar Memorial Lecture organized by Progressive Students Forum. We have been successfully conducting past two editions with a huge participation. The first lecture was in 2019 from the campus, and last year, despite of COVID situation, we have able to organize the lecture online in 113th birth anniversary of Godavari. In that way, this edition is also special since today, on the 25th that anniversary of Comrade Godavari, we are having the third GPML as a tribute to her legendary life. Before commencing the session, I'd like to share the concept behind having memorial lecture, why it is important to remind her contribution to those who are attending for the first time. Godavari Parulekar, who was a revolutionary anti-imperialist fighter and leader of historic Varli revolt, had committed much of her life to the cause of peasant, Adivasi and worker struggle. She was a social and political activist who fiercely stood against any form of oppression and exploitation and became the first woman law graduate in Maharashtra. She uh, she worked tirelessly in organizing so far unorganized class of domestic workers and brought them into the fold of trade union movement. In addition to the domestic workers, she also worked in organizing the peasant in Thane and leading their struggles. The the 40-day textile workers strike demanding increasing the dearness allowance in Mumbai in 1940 was led by Godavari along with other comrades. In 1945, she addressed a conference of 5,000 Adivasis, and 500 of them were women, held at a village Zari in the present day Talsari Tehsi, which marked the beginning of Varli Adivasi revolt against a century of bonded labor, debt slavery, oppression, and exploitation in the hand of landlord, money lenders, and forest contractors. In 1986, she was elected as a national president of All India Kisan Sabha, and in the is the she was the only held the post of so far. She worked as the national president of All Indian Democratic Women's Association, national vice president of Center for Indian Trade Union. She strength of the collective organization of people in challenging the exploiters and thereby realize the freedom is seen through the struggle that had been led by Godavari. The fight against the imperial forces is still continuing in the different part of the world. Latin America has borne some of the biggest casualis- casualties of colonialism and imperialism. US led imperialism and colonialism during the past war period has consistently sought to keep Latin America under its thumbs in accordance with imperialist America's backyard doctrine. However, Latin America also stands as the shining example of anti-imperialistic social emancipatory movement, which date back more than 2 centuries. People's political movement against neo-colonialism and imperialism that Latin America has witnessed over these years. Latin America serves as the beacon of alternative people's movement and imperialism and neoliberalism. On today, to speak on democracies in revolution, Latin American emancipation and emancipatory project of the 21st century, we have Professor Sonia Surbi Gupta. She will be talking about Democracies in the Revolution, Latin American Emancipation Project of 21st Century. That's the topic. And Sonia Surabhi Gupta is a professor at Center of European Latin American Studies, Jamia Millia Islamia University, Delhi. She also founder director of Center of European and Latin American Studies in the Jamia Millia Islamia University. Her specialization in literary and cultural studies in Latin America, Spanish and Indian comparative context. I'm welcoming Professor Sonia. We are honored to have you here. And for special address, we have Comrade Neela, uh, current state vice president of All India Democratic Women's Association in Karnataka. She has been a prominent figure in organizing women workers for rural part of Karnataka under the organization. She's also a renowned writer in Kannada language. Uh, Welcome, Comrade Neela. The lecture officially start with Professor Sonia to speak on the topic, followed by Neela's special address. After her, we will be open session to discuss. So, if audience have any questions, please comment on that comment session, and we will be take up your questions. So, officially inviting Professor Sonia to start. Over to you, Sonia.
Thank you very much, Irita. And I'm extremely grateful to the Progressive Students Forum of the Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Mumbai for giving me this privilege to be delivering the third Godavari Parulekar Memorial Lecture. And the kind of, remembering her today when the country is actually in the middle of this historic nationwide struggle of the farmers acquires a greater meaning actually, because as we all know, Comrade Godavari Parulekar's entire life was dedicated to the struggles of the Adivasis, to the struggle of our farmers within the Kisan Sabha, and also, of course, to the left and progressive movement of the country. So today, on her 25th death anniversary, to be talking about a region of the world where people's struggles have had significant victories also acquires a very special meaning. And I'm going to be speaking, as Chirita said, about the emancipatory processes that have unfolded in several countries in Latin America and the entire region actually over the last 2-3 decades. And basically these people's struggle actually are not just ordinary struggles. They kind of mark an epochal civilizational shift. And that is why it has brought the region into the forefront of original visions and original conceptualizations of emancipation itself, how we understand emancipation and what methods and processes a 21st century emancipatory projects would have. Latin America is one experience. And since that's my area of studies, I would be talking to you about it. As you all know, recently the United Nations General Assembly had met, and I was kind of listening to the speeches made at the UNGA. Sorry. So I was listening to these speeches which have been made at the UNGA by, various Latin American presidents. And in a speech which was deeply imbued in the cosmovision of indigenous people, the president of Bolivia, Luis Arce, emphasized the interdependence between human beings and nature, and he identified capitalism as the worst enemy of humanity. He was insisting that it is crucial to think of another way of life. And in the same vein, even the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, he called for a new humanity and, whose focus would be solidarity and shared destinies. So, in fact, what the presidents of Bolivia and Venezuela were actually saying is, all these new conceptions which have come from their own experiences in this last decade and a half or 2 decades of building a civilizational alternative to capitalist modernity. So, for example, whether we are talking about the incorporation of rights of nature in a new constitution in Ecuador in 2008, which drew from the idea of good living of the Quechua people, Sumak Tause. So the indigenous people, the Quechua indigenous people who are, from Ecuador, have this uh, conception of good living, which then laid the basis for a new understanding of development, which was linked to the indigenous socio-productive models. And then again, even the Aymara people in Bolivia have a very similar concept of living well, Suma Camania. And that became the political project in Bolivia for foregrounding harmonious relationships between humans and the Mother Earth as a basis for creating a kind of an indigenous nation based on feelings of solidarity and community. Uh, Similarly, in Venezuela, the kind of challenges to the minimalist conceptions of democracy through their, they have this project of 21st century socialism. You'll remember President Hugo Chavez's words, So they are also based on participatory methods of democracy, based on grassroots communes in Venezuela. And all of it, basically, as I was saying, presents an alternative to capitalist modernity. Uh, I would just like to remind you all how Latin America had seen almost uninterrupted electoral victories of center left and leftist forces in many countries, starting in 1998 with the election of Hugo Chavez in Venezuela in December 1998. So, actually, yeah, almost the end of the century, beginning of 21st century. And that gave rise to a new wave of governments that were seeking alternatives to neoliberalism. And this wave has often been referred to as the pink tide. It included Brazil, Lula da Silva's government, Uruguay, Ecuador, Bolivia, Argentina. Uh, so several of these countries voted through the elections for these center left and leftist forces. It might also be worth recalling that these electoral victories of the left were actually a result of the protests that had swept through the continent in the 1990s. These protests, many of you were probably very young and not even born, because I'm talking about the 1990s. They were against the structural adjustment programs which the dictatorships in Latin America in the decades of the 80s had embarked upon, and even the subsequent governments of the transition to democracy had embraced. So one of the first in the series of these street protests was the Caracazo riots in 1989 in Venezuela, when the discontent against neoliberal package kind of spilt over the streets of Caracas. Thousands were killed. Till date, the number is not clear. And that kind of was the beginning of the series which we will see in 1990s. The most remarkable of them, of course, being the Chiapas Peasants' Rebellion in 1994 in Mexico. If you don't remember this, I'd just like to recall that on January 1, 1994, the Mexican government was going to sign a free trade agreement with the US and Canada, and which would actually, under this agreement, the communally owned land of the indigenous peoples, which is known as ejidos in Spanish, it was to be disallowed. And the day the NAFTA, the free trade agreement, was going to be signed, thousands and thousands of indigenous peasants came down to the Mexico City, and finally, of course, it was a protracted struggle. So the Chiapas Peasant Rebellion is a remarkable struggle of people's struggle of the 90s in Latin America. Then again, there was a series of indigenous uprisings in Ecuador, which led to the overthrow of several presidents, who were kind of espousing the neoliberal programs. Then there was the Piquetero movement in Argentina in 1997, the movement of the MST, the movement of the landless in Brazil, the Cochabamba water wars in Bolivia, where the Bolivian government had privatized water. And this was a very successful struggle where the Bolivian people successfully fought back the privatization of their drinking waters. So many of these plebeian insurgencies not only pointed to the exhaustion of the neoliberal economic model, they also saw a kind of a collective assertion of popular will, particularly of the indigenous people. Uh, and I'm kind of foregrounding this the presence of the indigenous agenda in most of these struggles that took place in the 1990s because of a very important event that had taken place, and that was the commemoration of 500 years of the so-called discovery of America, which, as you know well, happened in 1492. So when Christopher Columbus reached the Americas, thinking that he had reached India. In fact, Christopher Columbus died in 1503, thinking that he had found this route to India. So in 1992, there was this commemoration of 500 years of of the genocide or of the solitude of the indigenous people, their marginalization, and the epistemic violence which was inflicted on their cultures and on their languages and on their value system, on their gods. So this is why the 90s are important. In fact, you might remember that 1992, the Nobel Peace Prize went to Rigoberta Menchú, an indigenous woman who kind of became emblematically, symbol of the indigenous people's fights against the dictatorships and against the neoliberal governments which later followed in the 80s and 90s. However, the pink tide kind of soon faced a severe conservative onslaught as the Latin American plutocracies were seeking a restoration of the old orders, and of course with their favorite ally, the imperial neighbor of the north, and they were putting all kinds of obstacles, not allowing these processes to move beyond the post neoliberal phase. And that is why we find that in the period 2015 to 2016, from Brazil to Venezuela, there's a massive right-wing assertion in the region. For example, in Brazil, the right wing was able to successfully impeach President Dilma Rousseff in August 2016. In Ecuador, the electorate actually chose for the continuation of the progressive project, which the citizens' revolution had ushered in. And they voted for Lenin Moreno to succeed Rafael Correa in May 2017. But the country's citizens' revolution actually came under threat because Lenin Moreno, just after his election, actually changed course, and which led to a huge erosion of the process that was going on in Ecuador. In Bolivia, the right wing carried out a coup d'etat in November 2019 elections, which Evo Morales had won again. And so they disallowed Morales, and he had to go. Even the vice president, Alvaro Garcia Linera, had to flee the country. And it was there was a massive violence which was unleashed against the members of the movement towards socialism, MAS party, which was the party of Evo Morales, who, by the way, was the first indigenous president to be ever elected in any country in Latin America. So the members of the MAS were targeted, but there was a targeted violence, particularly racially targeted violence against indigenous women in Bolivia. I mean, and this is just a year and a half back. So basically, the neoliberal soothsayers were quite convinced that the pink tide had actually ebbed. So, and we saw that in many countries, actually, the left forces did lose steam. But again, from 2018 onwards, in country after country, left forces have scored electoral victories once again and captured state power. For example, in Bolivia itself, the movement towards socialism has come back in a resounding victory with President Luis Arce, winning in December 2020. In Mexico, had already elected in 2018, in December 2018, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, who's, AMLO, you may have heard of the name. And Argentina also in December 2019 had elected a center-left party in power. Of course, the most recent addition has been Peru, with the spectacular victory of Pedro Castillo, who's actually a teacher in a rural school in the Andes Mountain. He led a very successful teacher strike, which went on for several months. And that person now occupies the presidency of the country since July 2021. But the main battlefield, of course, continues to be Venezuela, where the Bolivarian Revolution has stood its ground despite many challenges over the last 20 years. And of course, socialist Cuba, which continues to be a beacon of hope for the rest of the continent, despite a very difficult situation imposed on it, particularly during the COVID pandemic, which the U.S. economic blockade has worsened, and the constant media war which Cuba has been subjected to. The Cuban people also have continue to um, build socialism in their small island. So what you can see from this recount that I'm making is that the entire continent is actually caught in a literal class war and a race war, and they're dealing with these pressures of imperialism apart from the colonial legacy that they have. And dealing with such pressures, the popular forces and social movements in Latin America have turned the continent into a global center of creativity and resistance. Of course, these processes, these governments can be faulted on many counts, and there is no denying that they have made sometimes disastrous decisions. Sometimes they are forced to continue with policies which the indigenous people feel are to their detriment. But even so, we cannot deny that they have produced original epistemological and ontological narratives which articulate an alternative vision of development, alternative civilizational models, which are based largely on the worldview of the indigenous people who have till now, who had been excluded from the Latin America's, we call it the lettered city, from the knowledge system of legitimate knowledge of Latin America. The Peruvian Jose Carlos Mariátegui is considered to be the first Latin American Marxist, and he had said in 1928, and I cite him, "We do not want socialism in Latin America to be an imitation or a copy. It must be a heroic creation. We must inspire Indo-Latin American socialism with our own reality, with our own language." So basically what I want to do in the rest of my lecture is to look at three major conceptualizations that have been foregrounded as the bedrock of the emancipatory projects that we have just recounted in Latin America. And the first one of them is how there have been new conceptualizations on democracy itself against the minimalist concept of democracy. Because all these emancipatory processes have given rise to thinking of democracy in a new way. Western think tanks, for example, limit themselves to traditional set criteria of measuring democracy. So development, the role of state, citizens' rights. But actually, these criteria fall woefully short when they are used in the kind of situations that we are seeing, the dynamic, on the move kind of situations in Latin America. So Latin American democracies in revolution are thinking in terms of non-orthodox indicators of development. For example, I've just mentioned harmony with nature, the importance of relational goods, buen vivir, that is living well. Of course, at the same time, meeting the basic material necessities of human beings. So I'll dwell a little bit on what is this idea of democracies in revolution. It is the idea of a participatory and inclusive democracy, which is exercised through plebeian power, where the democratic process is, it kind of is not limited to just the formal representative version, but in fact, it becomes the site for building socialism through a popular transformation of the state itself. Now, so if we want to understand these processes, we'll probably have to consider the dual dynamics of, on the one hand, the capture of state power. So through elections, you win, you capture state power, but the state has its own existing institutions. So this is on one hand. But on the other hand, you also have simultaneously the construction of autonomous spaces of public participation, of emancipation, where you are building new structures. So what is this, in order to understand this conception of democracy as a site of revolution, I'd like to quote Bolivia's former Vice President Alvaro Garcia Linera, who explains this vision of democracies in revolution. And I quote him: "The contribution Latin America is adding to the debate of the left in world is that democracy is not only a method, it is also a space. It is the site of the revolutionary process itself, and it is in developing autonomous organizational capabilities of the society, in developing the capacity for participation and intervention in collective matters of common affairs, that the Latin American revolutionary processes have prospered and consolidated and are being developed." He continues, "Clearly, this is not a conception of democracy as a procedure, as a way of electing leaders, as it is in the literal version of the democratic, which is the minimalistic version of the democratic." And he says, "The fossil democracies of the North are not for us a role model or any model. The democracy that we are reinventing in Latin America is a plebeian democracy of the street, of the parliament, of collective action, of participation and mobilization." So basically, it is, and he continues. So let me read a little more. He says that it is at the site of democracy conceived as permanent and increasing participation of people in public life, in community life, in common affairs, family, educational, medical, financial, budgetary matters, where the revolutionary and ultimately socialist character of any revolutionary process is defined. In the final analysis, socialism is the absolute radicalization of democracy. So, uh, so after this definition of democracy, Garcia Linera then turns to the second debate that is being settled by the Latin American experience, a debate in the global left, which is the debate around seizing state power. And I quote, "Formed in the old school, for us Leninists, and I vindicate myself as an absolute Leninist, the aim is to take power. Taking power is correct. But if we who advocate seizing power do not understand that the state, however democratic, however participatory, is a growing monopoly of the collective, then taking power of the state is also no more than seizing that monopoly. And in the long run, taking over its institutions, and ultimately the replacement of those institutions and that monopoly by a new management and by a new bureaucracy. If we only seize power without democratizing, without building social power to democratize decision making, eventually we will become a new elite." So basically, what he's saying is that it is not enough to just capture state power and have leftist forces, in winning elections. What is important is the participatory conception of democracy, and that is why we find in Latin America there are these frequent constituent assemblies, change of constitutions, referendums, leader people interactive dialogue through a singular use of the mass media, as we saw in the case of Hugo Chavez and even others. Nicolas Maduro continues to do it. So, and to those in the left who believe that since state is an organ of class rule, then taking state power is corrupting, Garcia Linera replies that the solution cannot be to go into an asceticism, to go into an ascetic adventure of reclusion. In any case, what characterizes these democracies in revolution in Latin America is precisely that they are not state enterprises. So the formulation that Garcia Linera is making, about the simultaneous existence of two kinds of power structures, the capture of the state power and its institutions, and alongside building new structures of social power, of popular hegemony, of people's power, is a kind of dual power, and which takes us back to the Bolshevik Revolution, where Lenin, was explaining the coexistence of two structures of power, and he had written on dual power. And I quote Lenin: "The highly remarkable feature of our revolution is that it has brought about dual power." What is this dual power? Alongside the provisional government, the government of bourgeoisie, another government has risen. So far weak, incipient, but undoubtedly a government that actually exists and is growing: the Soviets of workers and soldiers' deputies. So basically, On one hand, you have the state organs of power. You have the army, the bureaucracy, the officialdom. And on the other, Lenin says, emphasizing the unique political content is a power which is directly based on revolutionary Caesar, of the direct initiative of the people, what we call direct democracy in the case of Venezuela. It is not a law which is enacted by the state. It is an entirely different kind of power. Yeah. So on the one hand, you have this parliamentary bourgeois democratic republics, which will have the usual type of power, which kind of exists in most of the world. And then you have the kind which are being tried to be set up by the Bolivarian process. So of course, in the case of Soviet Union, this coexistence of two kinds of powers, the Soviets and the state, was a temporary phase, which was going to last only till the old order was smashed. But in the case of the emancipatory processes which are underway in Latin America, for example, in Venezuela, the concept of dual power, is a long durée process, and which is why I think it's important to go to Venezuela's experiment with building participatory democracy. So I'll just briefly look at Venezuela's experiments with what they call building a communal state. By communal state, they mean a state based on communes. Now, what are the communes? The communes, in Venezuela, you have these communal councils, which are grassroots bodies. They comprise of few hundred families in a local neighborhood. So basically, they are a new mechanism for political participation and community self-management. We are aware of it. We have some kind of, the Panchayat Raj, etc., local self-governments. But this is quite different because the highest decision-making body of these communal councils are popular assemblies. And they manage key local programs and developments. And the elected representatives of the communal councils then make up communes which work on larger projects covering a larger area. So there is a Ministry of Communes in Venezuela, and according to their website, there are more than 47,000 registered communal councils and nearly 3,000 communes in Venezuela now. And the commune movement has transformed the popular culture, the political culture. There's a surge, I mean, not now so much because of the economic downturn, but in the heydays of the Bolivarian process, there was a surge in grassroots organizations, class consciousness, popular mobilization, activation of popular forces outside of the state bureaucracy. So this attempt to establish true participatory democracy through communal councils as expression of popular power has been seen by social scientists as viewed through the Leninist concept of dual power, and kind of recognizing that what is unique about the Venezuelan situation is the fact that even sectors of the state are working actively to dismantle and dissolve the old state apparatus by devolving power to these communal councils. Of course, it's not been easy. The spirit of democracy lies in the communes, but the comuneros, as they are called, the communards, often have to fight state bureaucracy. And there are conflicts between the bureaucratic state apparatus and this emerging communal socialist state of, within Venezuela. And I'll give you one example. There are several examples that can be given. Very recently, of course, also there are continuous dynamic of tension and cooperation between the communes and the revolutionary government. I'll give you one example, the example of El Maizal, which is a commune located in the rural Venezuela. So in 1999, when Hugo Chavez came to power, the new constitution was adopted, and there was a kind of collective there was a land reform done. And then again, this land reform was made deeper in 2001. And on March 5, 2009, President Chavez had gone to this area where this commune El Maizal is, and he declared that 600 hectares of unproductive land in that municipality will be given over to this self-organized peasants for collective production. So the commune was set up in 2009. But the land was given not to the commune, but to a state-run agricultural enterprise. And the peasants were asked to work on it. But it was the commune carried out a protracted struggle along with the nearby communal councils, and El Maisal finally in 2014 only was able to then get the ownership of that land. So all through this period, of course, Hugo Chavez died 1 year earlier, but despite President Chavez's orders and the active popular mobilization, the bureaucracy, which was in cahoots with private landowners, they tried their best for the land to remain in that state-owned company. In fact, since 2014, El Maisal has become one of the strongest communes in Venezuela, with a very efficient productivity, much above the national average. And then it has diversified the products. It sells food at a reasonable price to people, often in collaboration with the government. The government has these local committees for food distribution and production, which had been set up in 2016, because you must have heard of these massive food scarcity in Venezuela, thanks to the US sanctions, US economic war, and of course also the financial downturn. So the commune, the Maisal commune and its leadership stands firmly with the revolutionary government in this dynamic creative tension that I'm talking about. And it works with the government, struggles against it, and continues to build the communal model of collective well-being. So what I'm trying to say is that the 20th century socialist projects, instead of moving towards a democratic socialist radicalization, sometimes make mistakes, and they substitute popular power by state power, as happened, in the case of Soviet Union, where the party and the ruling elite actually, became powerful. It wasn't really a popular power. I mean, that is what we, think now when we look back at the Soviet process. But the example of El Maisal shows that the social ownership of land and means of production with new forms of management is the only hope for a sustained movement towards building socialist democracy in Venezuela. And that is why President Hugo Chavez had given a slogan, Comuna or Nada, which means commune or nothing. And it is even today used by the comuneros in their protest rallies, because what is happening today is that many in the government and even in the Chavista ranks actually think that privatization is a solution to face the economic war which the country is confronting. It's a very complex situation. So some sugar mills have been recently privatized, and the local communes are up in arms. And this is their slogan, commune or nothing. In fact, one Venezuelan anthropologist, Iraida Vargas, in a recent interview I was reading, and she says that actually communes are so successful because they are not an external implant. They have not been imposed, because the communal culture, the commune culture, is rooted in the indigenous people's traditions of collective land ownership. And so in fact, she says in her interview that the US sanctions have inadvertently promoted communal forms, which were kind of subterranean in the Venezuelan society. Because if you don't have food, you have a piece of land, lot of people are now joining these collectives to grow food, grow their own food. And there has been a growing identification of the people and communal initiatives in the recent years. So, so what they're saying is that maintaining and recovering those traditions of solidarity is necessary if we are committed to socialist future. With this, I think I'll just quickly come to race as a category and the assertion of indigenous identity, because many times we feel that, okay, these are social movements, they are more identity based, but that is not true, because in Latin America, at least, one important concept that has emerged is that of identifying capitalism as a racialized regimen, as a racial capitalism, which came out of the racial structuring of colonial society in Latin America. So what happened in Latin America was that the idea of race was employed to grant legitimacy to relations of dominations. I don't have time to go into that history, but I'm sure all of you know that the so-called discovery and the conquest of Americas was actually a genocide of the indigenous people, and it is also inseparable from the seizure of their land. Land was not property. There was no concept of land as property. but what was done is that the seizure of the land was done in the name of inferior races, cannot look after themselves. So the transformation of land into property was actually done through the invention of racialization in the colonies, where only the Europeans could hold land. So which is why today, if you have to contest racism, it cannot be done only by opposition to white supremacy, because it is the structure of racialization which sits at the core of all social and political structures, not only in Latin America, but in the modern world as a whole, and that is the enemy. So ultimately, even the class structures of capitalism cannot be understood, let alone transforming them, without understanding how they were built through, creating structures of racialization. That once the indigenous people were alienated from their land, they were killed, they died. Then through the Atlantic slave trade, African slaves were brought to Latin America, particularly Caribbean, Brazil, Cuba, but entire Latin America. And which is why respect for indigenous and Afro-descendant worldviews has become a hallmark of left and progressive forces in Latin America. When in state power, an alternative vision of development based on the cosmovisions of the ethnic groups and principles of ecology has been incorporated. As I told you, the rights of nature in the case of new constitutional amendments in Ecuador and Bolivia. So this entire idea I was telling you of living well, which is not based on consumption, so these ideas have been incorporated uh, into these new concepts that are coming up from the Latin American experience. The last point I would like to mention is how the progressive cycle of Latin American emancipatory processes have been thinking about Latin America, about the idea of Latin America. So the first 2 decades of 21st century have actually coincided with the commemoration of 200 years of the independence of Latin America. The independence of Latin America, you would recall, was 1810s, 1820s. So many countries are, Mexico recently celebrated its 200 years of independence. Our foreign minister Jaishankar was there. So the question in front of Latin American socialist processes was how to construct a political instrument of liberation and unity of Latin America against the giant of the North. So this question has always been paramount for the liberators of Latin America, because as soon as they got independent in 1820s, the US, the northern neighbors' expansionist design, beginning with the Monroe Doctrine, always looked, as was mentioned earlier, always looked at Latin America as their backyard. They could do anything. And under the name of Pan-Americanism, there was also a kind of authority to govern Latin America in the way they want to. And many of these countries actually, after the dictatorships also, adopted the formulas of Washington Consensus. It was only after the pink tide came that several instruments of Latin American regional integration, anti-imperialist instruments were created. For example, the Telesur, which was started in 2005, is a television channel. The South also exists. The South should have its own channel against the media giants. And therefore, Telesur was created with Eduardo Galeano, Danny Glover, and many other people in Venezuela. Similarly, Petrocaribe. Venezuela has an alliance with Caribbean states, and they give them oil at 40% lower than world market prices. So this again is an alliance. The Banco del Sur, the Bank of South, which hasn't really taken off. So basically, the idea of Latin American integration alongside the conception of a multipolar world without hegemonies. So to defeat the unipolar imperial hegemony, to have a balance of universe, these instruments were created. And again, I would say that this was not a top-down approach. It was not the governments who sat down and said, okay, let's create these instruments of regional unity. In fact, these instruments of regional integration are a product of the social forums, the World Social Forum, the movements of the 1990s, which had thrown up new forms of political organization, and had brought the entire Latin American popular forces under one umbrella. For example, uh, they were constantly meeting, having a dialogue with each other, forming alliances during the social forums. So, I will just take my last few minutes to talk about one particular instrument of regional integration, which is very important, and that is the CELAC. The CELAC is the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. It is a 33-member regional grouping. It was created in 2011, basically for a deeper integration within Latin America. And in a sense, it's an embodiment of the dream of the liberator Simon Bolivar, who had, when he was liberating Venezuela, Colombia, Panama, etc., had thought of a unified Latin America. Uh, uh, you know, in a way, it is also a kind of a counter uh, seeking independence from Washington, because till now, what existed in Latin America as an instrument of integration is the Organization of American States, which was, made up in 1948, I think it came. And till the advent of the pink tide, it was actually an instrument which was used by the United States to wield political, financial, and even legal control over all the Americas. In fact, in 1962, they expelled socialist Cuba from the Organization of American States for being a Marxist regime. And therefore, this expulsion of Cuba in 1962 actually epitomizes the OAS, it's called OAS, its subservience to Washington's geopolitical interests. And it has basically been a rubber stamp of the US. Now, when the pink tide came and when the CELAC came, the OAS was sidelined. But in 2016, 2017, 2015, when there was this right-wing upsurge again, the OAS suddenly became active. It was used to target Venezuela, to diplomatically isolate Venezuela. And, they invoked the Democratic Charter against Venezuela, and Venezuela finally left the OAS. Historically, as I said, the OAS has been used to bludgeon all those governments who dare to oppose the United States. However, now, 2018, 2019 onwards, with the return of the left forces in state power, there has been a revitalization of the Latin American integration process. And on September 18, just very recently, Mexico hosted the 6th presidential summit of the CELAC, of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, and that's a very welcome development. Apart from the OAS, the right-wing governments who are a loyal ally of the United States had also created the Lima Group. I think there were about 11, 12 members, and it was basically again to isolate Venezuela. Now, with the election of Pedro Castillo to the presidency of Peru, that group has been dissolved. Mexico had anyway, and Argentina, I think, had anyway walked out of this group. So Latin America again seems to be validating its regional autonomy and sovereignty against US pressures and US agendas. So to conclude, I would say that clearly the region is witnessing a sharpening of class struggle. Though it was claimed that the dawn of a new age in Latin America is going to be a short-lived mirage, the pink tide is a one-time affair, but the zeal with which the Venezuelan people have defended the Bolivarian process, the zeal with which the movement towards socialism in Bolivia has come back just 1 year after the coup d'etat in November 2019. And so many of these, progressive regimes are resisting the agenda of regime change despite economic hardship. There seems to be little chance of the continent returning to a 1990s kind of a model. So while Mexico, Argentina, Bolivia, and as I said, more recently, Peru have brought into power forces that are trenchant critics of neoliberalism and US imperialism in the region, the upcoming elections, it is quite clear that the right-wing candidates, are going to have a tough time. For example, Chile is going to vote now in November, and Chile, has seen a very strong student movement, which later also became a popular movement. And the right winger Sebastian Pinera, anyway, he cannot contest, and his name actually came out in the Pandora Papers recently. And it's quite likely that the center-left candidate might make it to victory. In Brazil, of course, in 2022, Jair Bolsonaro will face Lula da Silva, on who so many false cases had been foisted, but now he's out, and he will be contesting the next election in 2022. In Colombia, which is the country with the closest ally of the US and region, the president Ivan Duque cannot contest for a re-election. There again, whoever is the right-wing candidate will be up against a very popular left-wing mayor of Bogota, Gustavo Petro. All these elections are coming, and it is in the middle of this very complex scenario that the Latin American emancipatory projects, they continue to stand strong and for a socialist future, defending the gains that they have made in the last 3 decades. So we look towards Latin America, not to copy, because we have to find our own models. As Mariátegui had said, socialism cannot be a copy, but certainly to look at these absolutely new epistemic projects that are coming up along with the emancipatory projects of the 21st century in Latin America. I thank you all once again, and I salute the memory of Comrade Godavari, whose life, who, if she had been alive, would have been happy seeing what is happening in Latin America today. I thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. It was a really energetic and informative talk. Really, thank you. Now I'm welcoming Comrade Neela for the special address. So, Comrade Neela.
आज प्रोग्रेसिव स्टूडेंट फोरम को मैं सलाम देना चाहती हूँ, और बहुत महत्विक इंफॉर्मेशन सोनिया जी ने दिया है। मैंने इस दृष्टि से मेरा बात आपके सामने रखना चाहती हूँ कि पूरे दुनिया भर एक संघर्ष हो रही है। वो संघर्ष तो वर्किंग क्लास और साम्राज्यशाही और पूंजीवाद जो नवोदारवादी है, उसके बीच में ये संघर्ष तो हो रही है। मैं ये याद दिलाना चाहती हूँ कि गोदावरी परुलेकर जी का एक बुक कन्नड़ में हम वो बुक का नाम ट्रांसलेट करे हैं कि मानव एच्चेत्तागा। वो किताब को सेंट्रल साहित्य अकादमी का पुरस्कार मिला था, और वो किताब पूरा दुनिया भर सभी लोगों को मिलता है। और मैंने मेरा क्रांतिकारी सलाम गोदावरी ताई को मैंने करना चाहती हूँ। और इसी समय ये जो संघर्ष हो रही है पूरे दुनिया भर, इसके साथ साथ बहुत सारे चिंताजनक विषय भी हो रही है पूरे दुनिया भर। अफगानिस्तान का अगर इश्यू देखते हैं तो वहां महिलाओं का एक स्लोगन मुझे याद आता है, अगर महिलाओं का विमोचन नहीं है तो मातृभूमि का विमोचन कहां। और इसी समय में मैंने चीना के डेवलपमेंट का याद भी करती हूँ, और वहां का जितनी भी प्रोग्रेस हो रही है मैं वो प्रोग्रेस के लिए डेफिनेटली मैं सलाम करती हूँ। ये पूरा दुनिया का हिस्ट्री अगर हम देखते देखते आए तो हमारे देश का हालत भारत में, और उसमें भी महिलाओं का हालत के ऊपर अगर आप दृष्टि डालना चाहते हैं तो हमने थोड़ा अलग रूप से यहाँ देखना पड़ता। एक तरफ सत्ता का हमला हो रहे है, वो भी क्रूर हमला हो रही है, उसके साथ साथ जनता का प्रतिरोध भी हो रही है। इसके बीच में चुप्पी भी बढ़ रही है, मौन बढ़ रही है, मगर वो चुप्पी तोड़ने का, वो मौन तोड़ने का अनिवार्यता भी बढ़ रही है। यह बहुत आशाजनक बात है। कम्युनलिज्म का रास्ता तो फैसिज्म के तरफ हो गया, फैसिज्म का मोड़ ले लिया है, और फैसिज्म को प्रतिरोध करने के लिए बहुत सारे कई लोगों की आलोचना ऐसा हो रही है कि जो कम्युनलिज्म या फैसिज्म को पीछे हटाने वाले पॉलिटिकल फोर्स, इलेक्ट्रल पॉलिटिकल फोर्स जो है, उसके साथ रहने से या उसका शक्ति बढ़ाने से इस देश को अच्छा होगा। मगर मैं ये दृष्टि से देखना चाहती हूं, अगर कम्युनलिज्म या फैसिज्म को लड़ना है तो वर्किंग क्लास लड़ेगा, और वर्किंग क्लास का जो शक्ति है उसको बढ़ाना चाहिए और उनके साथ ठहरना चाहिए। ये आज का जरूरत है। मैंने थोड़ा भारत देश में जो भी डेवलपमेंट हुआ है उसके बारे में मैं यहाँ रखना चाहती हूँ कि कोरोना तो सांक्रमिक पैंडेमिक आप देखे हैं 2 साल से। इस सांक्रमिक समय में हमारे महिलाओं का हालत क्या हुआ और जो कामकाज लोगों का हालत क्या हुआ, कि आप लोगों को मालूम है। एक तो सब महिला घर के अंदर दुगना काम करने लगा और लैंगिक शोषण हर घर में, बहुत सारे घर में लैंगिक शोषण का शिकार बन गए हमारे महिला, और इस साथ साथ मानसिक हिंसा भी बढ़ गई है पूरा। एक गांवों में थोड़ा अलग है, सिटी में अलग है, मगर ये कोरोना संक्रमित पैंडेमिक समय में गांव के लोग बहुत मानवीय रूप से ये कोरोना संक्रमित को फेस करे हैं, मुखामुखी करे हैं, सामना करे हैं। कि जो भी लोग कोरोना से मरे हैं, कि गांव में लोग एक बार जन्म लेना है और एक बार मरना है, चलो हमें उनके साथ रहना है। मैंने गांव में काम करती हूँ, मनरेगा में काम करती हूँ, और मैं कंपेयर करना चाहती हूँ। ये जो सत्ता की बात है वो सिटी में, शहर में बहुत असर हो गया, मगर गांव में है ना, लोग सत्ता के बात थोड़े सुने हैं, मगर निसर्ग की बात, दिल की बात ज्यादा सुने हैं। मन की बात नहीं, दिल की बात ज्यादा सुने हैं। मैं एक देखी हूं, और इसी समय में देश में कम्युनलिज्म फैला गया, इतना फैला गया कि जो चुन के गए हैं वो भी बीजेपी का लोग जो सत्ता में गए हैं, जो सीट के ऊपर है, गद्दी पे बैठे हैं, उन्होंने ये भी स्टेटमेंट दिया कि इंडिया में कोरोना मरकज लाए हैं, मुस्लिम व्यापारियों से आप सब्जी मत खरीदो। ये ओपन बयान दिया है। ऐसा हालत पूरा कोरोना के समय में दुनिया भर हमने देखे हैं कि कोरोना एक वायरस को वैज्ञानिक तौर से एक्सप्लेन करने के बजाय ये सत्ता वो कोरोना को भी इस्तेमाल करने लगे, इस्तेमाल करने। इसका बुरा असर कितना हुआ। हम महिलाओं के बीच में जाकर महिलाओं के साथ बात करके उनके दिल का बात समझने लगे तो हमें ये मालूम हो गया कि हमारे मुस्लिम महिला बच्चे आतंक में पड़ गए हैं, भयग्रस्त हो गए हैं। अगर एक देश में सत्ता इतना क्रूर बन जाती है और इतना भयंकर रूप से लोगों के ऊपर पड़ते हैं, इतना हमला करते हैं, तो माइनॉरिटी, दलित, अल्पसंख्यक, आदिवासी और गरीब लोग घबरा जाते हैं और लोग इतना परेशान हो गए कि उन्होंने एक के ऊपर दूसरों का विश्वास टूटने लगी है। ये बहुत बड़ा चिंता की बात है। इसके जिम्मेदार कौन है? इसके जिम्मेदार तो स्टेट है, इसके जिम्मेदार तो सत्ता है। क्यों? कि लोगों को कोरोना पैंडेमिक समय में कि घर के अंदर डाले हैं, 4 दीवार के अंदर डाले, और बाहर उनका कम्युनल पॉलिटिक्स उन्होंने चालू रखे, जारी रखे। जब लोग उनके घर वापस आने लगे, उस समय भी लोगों के साथ, जो माइग्रेट एम्प्लॉय के साथ, माइग्रेट लेबर के साथ, माइग्रेंट लोगों के साथ, हमारे महिला के साथ क्या क्या हुआ आप सब लोग देखे हैं। वो एक बहुत बड़ा स्टडी की बात है। जो गर्भवती महिला कि वही उनका डिलीवरी हो गई रास्ते के ऊपर, जो वृद्ध महिला, जो बच्चे, उनकी हालत क्या हुआ इस देश में आप देखे हैं। मगर वो समय में भी महिला आंदोलन के और डेमोक्रेटिक आंदोलन के लोग कोरोना के डर से भी बाहर आकर कि रास्ते के ऊपर उन्होंने स्लोगन दिए और लोगों के साथ कि तबके हुए लोगों के साथ, वर्किंग क्लास लोगों के साथ, लेबर के साथ कि ठहरे हैं ये आंदोलन, ये मूवमेंट इस देश में सत्ता की जो हमला के प्रतिरोध में कि उभर कर आया, ये हमें देखना बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। और उसी समय हमारे स्टेट सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने कि कोर्ट को ये अफिडेविट दिया कि हम लोगों को जो कोरोना से मरे हैं उनको हम परिहार नहीं दे सकते, हमारे पास पैसा नहीं है। क्यों नहीं है वो बात हम बाद में देखेंगे। ये तो पूरा भारत देश में जितने भी लोग लड़ रहे हैं वो पूछे हैं, उनका प्रश्न है, हम सभी का ये प्रश्न है। मैं शुरुआत ही कहना चाहती थी कि मैं सलाम करना चाहती हूँ इस देश में दूसरा स्वतंत्र आंदोलन जो इंडिपेंडेंट मूवमेंट है, ये दूसरा इंडिपेंडेंट मूवमेंट के रूप में हमारे किसानों ने कि 10 महीने से जो सत्याग्रह ला रहे हैं, जो सत्याग्रह कर रहे हैं, वो सभी सत्याग्रही, सभी हमारे किसान साथियों को मैं सलाम करना चाहती हूँ। क्योंकि इस देश में समाजवाद लाने के लिए, समतावाद लाने के लिए अलग अलग रूप से प्रयोग हो रही है। तो इस समय में मैं कोरोना के बाद पूरा देश भर का एक आंकड़ा अगर मैं आपके सामने रखना चाहती हूँ कि भूख से लोग मर रहे हैं। कितना मर रहे हैं भूख से लोग, अगर आप देखते हैं तो मुझे ये बात याद आता है, पश्चिम बंगाल में 1943 में जितने लोग भूख से मरे हैं वो भूखमारी था। उसके बाद ये दूसरा भूखमारी कोरोना के समय में सत्ता के वजह से, प्रभुत्व के वजह से कि भारत में हो गई है। ये बहुत चिंता की बात है। अगर सत्ता चाहता तो इतना भूखमारी वो कम कर सकते थे, लोगों को बचा सकते थे। उसमें मरने का संख्या में महिलाओं का, बच्चों का, आदिवासियों का और दलित और गांव में जो लोग एग्रीकल्चर वर्कर से उनका ज्यादा है, ये हमें देखना पड़ेगा। देखो, भूख से मरने का हमारे देश का जो स्थान है विश्व भर में 107 देशों में हमारा देश का स्थान है 94, वो स्थान है हमारा। इतना हमारा देश गिर गया है, इतना लोग हमारे देश में भूखमरी से मर रहे हैं। और मुझे ये बात की शंका है, सिर्फ शंका नहीं, कि पूरे अगर 1-2 साल के बाद तक भी ये भूखमरी का मरने का संख्या और भी बढ़ जाएगा। क्यों बढ़ जाएगा बोले तो कि लोगों के बीच में 2 रूप का वर्ग हो गया। एक तो जो सत्ते में बैठे हैं वो कॉर्पोरेट के साथ उनके दोस्ती है, और जिनके साथ उन्होंने दोस्ती करे है उनका तो संपत्ति बढ़ रही है। और जो आम लोग है, जो कामकाज लोग है, जो महिला है, पूरे महिला, और जो खेत में काम करने वाले हैं, जो लेबर्स है, उनके बीच में कि आर्थिक का जो स्तर है वो गिर रही है, उनका इनकम कम हो रही है, अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट बढ़ रही है। मैं आपको कहना चाहती हूं कि 2021 और 2022 का बजट में हमारे सत्ता जो कॉर्पोरेट्स का टैक्स है वो टैक्स माफ करे, और उसी समय में कोर्ट को कहते हैं हमारे सत्ता की केंद्र सरकार कि लोग अगर कोरोना से भी मरे तो उनको हमने परिहार नहीं दे सकते, माइग्रेंट लेबर को हमने हेल्प कुछ नहीं कर सकते। मगर इसी समय में उन्होंने कॉर्पोरेट्स का जो बड़े बड़े लोग हैं, अदानी अंबानी जैसा, कि उनका टैक्स उन्होंने माफ करते हैं। और आप ये देखना चाहिए मुकेश अंबानी का जो इनकम है वो 37.2 से भी ज्यादा बढ़ गई है। गौतम अदानी का इनकम जो है वो 113% गुना ज्यादा हो गया है। इनका इनकम, कॉर्पोरेट्स का इनकम मैं सिर्फ एग्जाम्पल दे रही हूं आपको। इनका इनकम बढ़ जाती है और लोग भूख से मर जाते हैं। लोगों का एम्प्लॉयमेंट इन्होंने कि बेरोजगार बनाते हैं, लोगों को एम्प्लॉयमेंट नहीं देते हैं। कि लोग इतना तंग हो गए हैं कि दाम तो बढ़ गए हैं, पेट्रोल डीजल इस सब के साथ साथ कि सामान्य महिला उनका जिंदगी का जो रोजमारी रोज का अनाज है उस सभी का रेट बढ़ गया है। इसके साथ साथ अगर किसान को कुछ मिल रही है प्रॉफिट, नहीं, किसान भी परेशान में है और लोग भी परेशान में है। संपत्ति किसके पास जा रही है? संपत्ति तो जा रही है कॉर्पोरेट के पास। बचा हुआ एक एग्रीकल्चर, हमारे भूमि, हमारे लैंड, वो भी है ना, वो कृषि भूमि को भूमि की कॉर्पोरेट को देना चाहते हैं। वही किसानों का खिलाफ लाए सो 3 कृषि कायदा आप बाद में देख सकते हैं कि बेरोजगारी कितना बढ़ गया है, उसमें महिला बहुत परेशान है। इतना बढ़ गया बेरोजगारी कि शहर में, सिटी में 15% से ज्यादा बेरोजगारी बढ़ गई है पहले से, और गांवों में 11% से ज्यादा बेरोजगारी बढ़ गई है। लोग कैसा जी सकते? उसमें महिला का हालत क्या हो रही है? एक तो खाने का चीज में बहुत कमी हो रही है, पौष्टिक आहार बहुत कम ले रही है। कितना कैलोरी फूड हमें लेना है उतना महिला नहीं ले रही है। और इसके साथ साथ गरीब, पूरे गरीब लोग खाने का उनका थाली अगर आप देखते तो हमारे शरीर के लिए क्या क्या चीज खाना है वो नहीं खा रही है। इसीलिए मैं कहती हूं कि आइंदा भविष्य में बेरोजगारी से और हमारे भूखमरी से मरने वालों का संख्या बढ़ जाएगी, बढ़ जाती है। और गवर्नमेंट भी यही चाहती है कि लोगों का जिम्मेदारी उन्होंने नहीं ले सकते हैं, नहीं ले रही है। मैं मनरेगा में काम करती हूँ। जब से मनरेगा आए हैं कि महात्मा गांधी रूरल एम्प्लॉयमेंट गारंटी एक्ट जो है, वो एक्ट इंप्लीमेंट करने के समय में कि सत्ता को कोई दिलचस्पी नहीं है। वो नहीं चाहते हैं लोगों को ये एक्ट के मुताबिक कि काम देना। इसीलिए जितने भी लोग जॉब कार्ड बना लिया है उसमें 50%, 50% लोगों को भी कि मनरेगा में काम नहीं दे रहे हैं। मगर मैं इसी समय में आपको ये मैं बताना चाहती हूं, ठीक है, सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट तो मनरेगा मारना चाहते, मनरेगा को नाश करना चाहते, मतलब मनरेगा एक्ट को वापस लेना चाहते, निष्क्रिय करना चाहते हैं। इसीलिए बजट के समय में मनरेगा के लिए कम बजट रखते हैं। ये कोरोना के समय में ज्यादा बजट रखना था, मगर सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट बजट नहीं रखे। 38,000 करोड़ रुपए से भी ज्यादा की रुपया कम दिए हैं मनरेगा के लिए। शहर से, हालांकि शहर से बहुत सारे लोग गांव को माइग्रेट होके आ गए हैं। उनको काम का जरूरत है कि काम का जरूरत है, कहाँ काम मिलना? काम तो मनरेगा में देने के लिए प्रोविजन है, मगर मनरेगा में बजट ही नहीं है तो काम कहाँ से मिलेगा? कि 50% से भी कम लोगों को उन्होंने कि काम वहां दे रहे हैं। और इसके साथ साथ सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ये कहा है कि एक सर्वे करो SC/ST कितना है, मगर वो सिर्फ सर्वे की बात नहीं है, ये बात है कि SC/ST वर्किंग क्लास अब तक मनरेगा में एक होकर काम करते थे कि काम करते समय हर कम्युनिटी का, हर जात का वर्किंग क्लास लोग जो एग्रीकल्चर वर्कर्स या किसान या कोई भी लोग वहां आकर काम करते कि वो एक होकर काम करते थे। मगर उनको डिवाइड करने के लिए सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट SC/ST की समीक्षा के नाम पे डिवाइड एंड रूल कर रही है। एक इंटरेस्टिंग बात ये है, शहर में बहुत सारे लोगों का छुट्टी पड़ रही है और ये इतना क्रूर रूप से फैसिज्म के स्वरूप लक्षण बढ़ रही है ना कि भयग्रस्त हो गए बहुत सारे लोग। मगर इसी समय में ये डेमोक्रेटिक बहुत सारे संस्थाएं हैं कि गांवों में ग्राम पंचायत है। ग्राम पंचायत में कोरोना के समय में भी शहर में पूरा शहर के रास्ता सन्नाटा जैसा हो गया, लोग घर के अंदर बैठे, मगर गांव में लोग मनरेगा काम पूछने के लिए ग्राम पंचायत गए। हमें काम चाहिए, हम काम करते। अब वैसे भी कोरोना से मरना या बेरोजगारी से मरना या भूखे मरना, हम भूखे नहीं मर सकते, हमें काम चाहिए, तो काम के लिए गए। देखो इंटरेस्टिंग सब्जेक्ट है, जब सिटी में लोग एक दूसरे से बात भी नहीं कर सके, अगर कोई मरे कि उनके लिए वहां गए भी नहीं कोई दफनाते समय, मगर गांवों में दफना के लिए भी लोग गए और मनरेगा काम पूछने के लिए भी लोग गए और बोले ये कोरोना किसी का साजिश है। ठीक है, कोरोना एक वायरस है, कोरोना को फेस करने के लिए हम क्या कर सकते, ये सब उनको कुछ मालूम नहीं था, इतना वैज्ञानिक रूप से मालूम नहीं था। मगर जो वर्किंग क्लास का लोगों का उनका ये ज्ञान था ना, वो विवेक था, उस उनके ज्ञान के रूप से कि लोग गांवों में भजन करते हैं, वो कहते हैं हम एक बार जन्म लेते और वापस हम चले जाते, इसके बीच में हम एक दूसरे के साथ रहना जरूरी है। ये जो सांस्कृतिक बहुसांस्कृतिक परंपरा है, वो बहुसांस्कृतिक परंपरा हमारे लोग कोरोना के समय में भी कि वो ज्ञान से काम करे, ये बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग सब्जेक्ट है। और मैंने ये मनरेगा काम लेने के लिए बहुत सारे महिला गए, काम लिए और एक होकर काम करे। हमें भी उससे है ना थोड़ा हिम्मत भी मिला है। हमारे देश में इस सत्ता के ये जो झूठे बात फैला रही है, उसको प्रतिरोध करने के लिए हमारे लोग कि बहुत अच्छे तरीके से तैयार हो गए हैं। कि मैंने किसान विरोधी कायदा के बारे में मैं बताना चाहती हूँ, आप सभी को मालूम है क्या क्या हो रही है हमारे किसानों के साथ। सिर्फ वो किसानों के साथ नहीं है, इस देश में जो डेमोक्रेटिक मूवमेंट बढ़ रही है उस सबके साथ हो रही है। मगर मुझे इस बात की गर्व है कि ये कायदा के खिलाफ महिला भी लड़ रही है, बहुत अच्छे तरीके से लड़ रही है। और मैं सलाम देना चाहती हूँ कि पंजाब, हरियाणा, उत्तर प्रदेश, उत्तराखंड, मध्य प्रदेश, राजस्थान और दिल्ली और महाराष्ट्र और केरला और दूर दूर स्टेट से भी हमारे किसान लोग, हमारे महिला की दिल्ली बॉर्डर वहां जाकर सत्याग्रह में शामिल होकर लड़ रहे हैं और एक अलग रूप का एक इंडिपेंडेंट स्ट्रगल के लिए एक मार्ग उन्होंने खुल रहे हैं। उन्होंने एक अलग मार्ग की देश के सामने है आज। मैं उनको सलाम देना चाहती हूँ। और मार्च 8 का ये जो इंटरनेशनल वीमेन डे है कि वहीं जाकर मनाए हैं लोग, और जनवरी 8 तारीख को रैत महिला दिन आचरण करे हैं पूरे देश भर में। मगर इसके साथ साथ हमारे महिला ये भी समझने शुरू करें कि कोरोना के समय में बिना चर्चा सुग्रीवाज्ञा करके उन्होंने पार्लियामेंट में 29 कार्मिक एक्ट को बदला दिया, रद्द कर दिया, कई एक्ट को अमेंडमेंट करे। और सभी एक्ट इसलिए करे, इस देश में जो वर्किंग क्लास लोग, जो महिला है, महिला का और एक नाम है काम। काम हम काम करते, जब हम 4-5 साल बन जाते हमने साल के कि मरते तक हम काम करते, कि हमारे लिए कई कायदा है अंदर, वर्किंग क्लास के लिए, लेबर्स के लिए कई कानून है अंदर। वो कानून का मार्ग भी, वो कानून का दरवाजा भी ये मोदी सरकार बंद कर दिया है। इसका बहुत बुरा असर हमारे महिलाओं के ऊपर हो रही है। इसीलिए दुनिया भर हमारी जो कार्मिक महिला है, पूरा दुनिया भर उन्होंने लड़े हैं, कोरोना के समय में लड़े हैं और रोड के ऊपर आए। और मैंने और एक बहुत चिंता की बात देश के अंदर आया है कि वो है यूएपीए कानून, जो कानून बाहर एक्टिविटीज को रोकने के लिए एक एक्ट है। वो एक्ट कांग्रेस से भी ज्यादा बीजेपी इंप्लीमेंट कर रहे हैं। बीजेपी कि उसमें 2015 से 2019 तक जितने भी वो कायदा के अंदर अरेस्ट करे हैं वो है 2019 से इधर उसका संख्या 72% बढ़ गया है। आप कंपेयर कर सकते हैं, उससे पहला कितना अरेस्ट हो गया, उसके बाद कितना अरेस्ट हो गया। तो ये बीजेपी का गवर्नमेंट है, ये गवर्नमेंट जो ह्यूमन राइट के लिए लड़ रही है, वो लोगों को सेटअप करने के लिए, और जो लोग डेमोक्रेटिक मूवमेंट करते हैं उनको एक फिक्स करने के लिए और सभी लोगों को देशद्रोही का दायरा में डालने के लिए वो इस्तेमाल करे यूएपीए का एक्ट। बहुत सारे लोग आप देख सकते हैं, सुधा भारद्वाज जैसा महिला, बहुत सारे लोग अभी जेल के अंदर है। बहुत चिंता की बात यह है हमें कि एनपीआर एनआरसी सीए के खिलाफ जो हमारे युवा लोग लड़े हैं, हमारे डेमोक्रेटिक मूवमेंट के सभी लोग लड़े हैं, उसमें महिला है, पुरुष है, बहुत सारे लोग हैं, ज्यादा युवा लोग भी है, स्टूडेंट्स है उसमें। अगर आप एक लिस्ट देखना चाहते हैं तो मैं आपके सामने रखती हूँ। एनपीआर एनआरसी के खिलाफ जो लड़े हैं उनका भी अरेस्ट हुआ है और उनके ऊपर कौन सा कायदा लागू करे है, यूएपीए का कायदा लागू करे है। किसान विरोधी कायदा के खिलाफ जो लड़े हैं उनको भी अरेस्ट करे हैं और जो कम्युनलिज्म के खिलाफ लड़े हैं उनको भी अरेस्ट करे हैं। देखो नूरदीप कौर जो सिंघू बॉर्डर में अरेस्ट हुआ है, उनको अरेस्ट करे हैं। बेंगलुरु की एक लड़की, 22 साल की एक लड़की रवि दिशा, उनको अरेस्ट करे हैं। क्या करी थी वो? ग्रेटा थनबर्ग का जो ट्वीट करके एक टूल किट का फॉरवर्ड करी थी, वो देशद्रोही बन गई और उनको अरेस्ट करे। मगर कोर्ट में, सुन रहे ना मेरे बात, और कोर्ट में रवि दिशा कहा है अगर हमारे हमारे किसानों के साथ ठहरना और किसानों के बात करना और ये जो 3 कायदा है किसानों के खिलाफ, वो लड़ना ही अगर गलत है तो मुझे जेल में रहना बहुत अच्छा लगता। हाँ
कॉमरेड, अगर आप थोड़ा जल्दी करेंगे, हमें क्वेश्चन आंसर्स भी लेने हैं।
यस ओके, कंक्लूजन मेरे बात लास्ट। ओके, तो आप महाराष्ट्र से निकिता जैकब, शांतनु मुलुक देखना चाहते और किसान स्ट्रगल को जो सपोर्ट करे थे अनुराग कश्यप, तापसी पन्नू, इनके ऊपर आईटी हमला हो गया। सीए के विरोध में जो लड़े थे नाताशा नर्मला, देवांगना कलिका, आसिफ इकबाल, आयशा सुल्ताना जो फिल्म का डायरेक्टर थी, इन सभी का अगर आप देखना चाहते हैं तो इस देश में जो डेमोक्रेटिक मूवमेंट रखना चाहते हैं, डेमोक्रेटिक मूवमेंट कर रहे हैं, कि उनके ऊपर ये हमारे सत्ता, हमारे सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट उनको अरेस्ट करना चाहते, उनके ऊपर हमला करना चाहते। मेरा लास्ट की बात मैं आपके सामने रखना चाहती हूँ कि इसके साथ साथ महिलाओं के ऊपर अत्याचार हो रही है और आप यूपी का आंगनवाड़ी महिला देखना चाहते हैं, उन्नाव के 3 दलित महिला का हालत आप देख सकते हैं। और एक सीजीआई है कि बहुत हमें चिंता की बात यह है, एक सीजीआई ने प्रश्न करते हैं कि संत्रस्त युवती के साथ आप शादी करना चाहते हैं, ये बहुत चिंता की बात है। मगर पूरा भारत देश में महिला मूवमेंट इसके खिलाफ लड़े हैं। और मेरा लास्ट मैंने ये बात कहना चाहती हूँ कि महिलाओं के ऊपर इतना अत्याचार हो रहे, दलित महिला इसका शिकार बन रही है, मुस्लिम महिला बहुत आतंकित इसमें है और दुनिया भर में स्टेट गवर्नमेंट कम्युनलिज्म के नाम पे कि पूरा कॉर्पोरेट के हाथ में पूरा देश उन्होंने देना चाहते हैं। मगर इसके बीच में हमें एक आशा किरण है, केरला में बहुत सारे युवा महिला और यूथ सत्ता में आ गए हैं। हमने उसको सत्ता नहीं कह सकते, अधिकार नहीं कह सकते, एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन में आए हैं और पीपल्स मूवमेंट में शामिल हो रहे हैं। और इस देश में हमें इस संघर्ष का रास्ता, एक अलग अलग प्रयोग का मार्ग हमारे सामने है पूरे देश में। तो इसलिए मैं एक कहना चाहती हूँ, भारत देश का महिला मूवमेंट और डेमोक्रेटिक मूवमेंट और ये अभी किसान मूवमेंट पूरा देश को एक रास्ता दिखा रहे हैं, एक रोशनी जैसा उभर कर आई है कि मैंने ये कहना चाहती हूँ, इस देश में सत्ता का हमला एक तरफ हो रही है मगर जनता का प्रतिरोध भी हो रही है। और इसके साथ कि जो दबके हुए लोग हैं, जो दलित है, जो महिला है, जो गांव में लोग हैं, वो लोग भी उनके ही रूप से वहां एक प्रतिरोध बढ़ रही है कि हमारा जिम्मेदारी ये बनती है, हम जमीन के ऊपर, जमीन पे जाकर लोगों के साथ बात करना है। मन की बात नहीं, दिल की बात सभी को सुनाना पड़ेगा। तो महिला इसके आगे है, पूरा देश भर में लड़ रहे हैं। ये संघर्ष का संस्कृति है, ये जो बहुसांस्कृतिक परंपरा कायम रखे हैं हमारे लोग, कि उस बहुसांस्कृतिक परंपरा के साथ हमारे आर्थिक एजेंडा जोड़कर महिला लड़ रही है। कि मैं सलाम कहना चाहती हूँ कि थैंक यू, मुझे कई बात आपके सामने रखने के लिए प्रोग्रेसिव स्टूडेंट फोरम ने मुझे समय दिया है। मैं धन्यवाद कहना चाहती हूँ। गोताई पगलेकर को मैं याद करके मेरा बात खत्म करती हूँ। सभी को मेरा नमस्ते।
Thank you, Professor Sonia or Comrade Neela. This has been a very insightful session, and now we can take the questions. So there are quite a few questions, so we can go ahead with that. The first question is for Professor Sonia. Is asked by Anuvriti Saxena. How intimately was the socialist democratic experiments of Latin America linked to the commodity boom? Did this dependency on the world market without structural changes in production structures lead to temporary welfare gains without permanent institutions of social support? You're on mute.
Yeah. So, Anuvriti, I'm not an economist. I'm afraid I cannot really answer this question, but all I can say is that undoubtedly that has been one of the weaknesses of the processes in Latin America, particularly Venezuela as an example. You know that they have not been able to make what you call, you know, these structural changes. You know, there have been attempts, but one also has to keep in mind that they have not been allowed to kind of carry out many things which they would have wanted to, because Venezuela is strangulated. I mean, Cuba, of course, is a different question. Cuba has been able to go beyond this, but because it's an older revolution, and also perhaps because of the nature of the revolution itself, Cuba has been able to do lots of things, and they have been able to adapt to new conditions, make bring changes in their economic policy at the right time. I won't be able to give you a specialist answer, but yes, undoubtedly there seems to be one major problem, and as I said, we can fault them. We can fault the processes on many counts, but I think that has to be done keeping the context in mind.
Okay, we can move ahead with the second question. Yeah, so Ashwin asks, how has the right wing used the narrative of corruption to win political power in Latin America and stall redistributive projects? What lessons can be learned from such a counter-revolutionary mobilizations?
Yes. So, this question, I think, gives me a chance to particularly again focus on Venezuela. You see, about Venezuela, particularly, not that there is no corruption. I mean, there is corruption, but this whole thing that this once wealthy nation, look what's happened to it. There's dictatorship, there's corruption, and they've squandered away the money in populist schemes. It's a very faulty argument, because if you look at Venezuela before the Chavistas actually came to power, people, 50% of the population did not even have a square meal a day. So this undoubtedly the right wing has used the narrative of corruption, but in the case of Latin America, most right wing presidents, look at Peru for example, most right wing presidents themselves have been removed on charges of corruption by their parliaments. If you're talking about Brazil, well, in the case of Brazil, they did use precisely the argument of corruption to remove Lula, imprison him. And there is no doubt, let's accept it, that whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Brazil, the bureaucracy is corrupt, which is why I was saying that the you have to have two different kinds of setups. And for example, in the case of communes, they have their accounts openly discussed, and audited by the assemblies. Now that opportunity is not really available when it comes to officialdom and straight bureaucracy. So undoubtedly, the right wing in the case of Brazil was able to use precisely the narrative of corruption before the election, of Dilma. Dilma won, and after the election of Dilma, they were also able to impeach her precisely on a technical ground. They were not able to get her on corruption, but on a technical this thing. So that is because they are able to build the narrative. And the problem in Brazil was that Brazil did not do the kind of popular mobilization which Venezuela has done. So these processes are very different from each other. So I think what lessons the left needs to learn from such counter-revolutionary mobilizations, as you're saying, is that you have to have your people with you. Once you capture state power, that's not enough. You have to have the people with you. It's a constant process, and therefore this gradual, change. It'll happen. It'll take time, but the fact that you have to have autonomous spaces where people will make decisions, where the people are with you, like in the case of Venezuela, which is why they have been, despite corruption, they have been able to withstand. So that is the lesson that you learn, that you cannot make the mistake which Brazil made, which the PT made, which the Workers' Party made in Brazil.
So we'll move on to the next question. It's by Meera. Meera asks, in Latin America, we see a diversity of leftist formations and social movements organized in different terrains of class struggle. What lessons can we learn from this? Has this been undermined by the rise of right wing?
I think one thing that you're very rightly pointing out in Latin America is that there is no model being copied. They're falling back on their own traditions of resistance, their own cosmologies, their own repertoire of, yeah, and also the struggles of the 60s, which cannot be wished away. I mean, it's called the old left, but the fact is that the old left was literally murdered, finished. I mean, look at Argentina, the death squads, people went into exile, etc. So it is true that when Latin America, actually the democracies came back in the 80s, the old left was either dead or in exile. Some of them came back. There was an entire lost generation. And therefore, these new forces that have come up, the old left is very much in there, but they're diverse. They're diverse because, their genesis has been very different. And also, as I said, the kind of assertion that we see from the indigenous and the Afro-descendant also brings this diversity into the discourse. So the lesson that we learn from this is that we have to have an autochthonous, our own language, idiom, our own idiom. Now, can we, like, for example, if the Latin Americans can fall back on the Andean rationality or on the Andean principles of solidarity and, collective farming, collective ownership, etc., do we have those resources available? Perhaps not. Perhaps what we have is an absolutely caste-ridden, setup, which is no way to go back. But maybe there are others. Maybe there are others, and so we need to see where our traditions of resistance are coming from, and there are enough of them. So, so the lessons to be learned for us in India would be to see that it is possible, to have, in 21st century, in a multi-party kind of an election, come and do the kind of things that are being done in many countries in Latin America, not in just one. Has the this diversity of leftist formation been undermined by the rise of the right wing? Well, the right wing is very much there. In Venezuela itself, the property majorly is in private hands, which is why they can, hoard and, create problems for the government. So it's, it's a really early stage of these processes. We don't know where they will go, but the fact is that at the moment, the right wing is once again has been fended off. It has been fended off. As I said, it did come up in 2015, 2016, but since 2019, 2020, and now 21, and as I said, even 22 might have some very good news for us. So it is possible for these processes to continue consolidating themselves, and that is the lesson that is coming from Latin America.
Thank you, ma'am. We'll move on to the next question. The next question, okay. This is from Soumya, and this is for Comrade Neela. While organizing women workers, is it not true that the different socio-economic backgrounds bring in more challenges?
अलग अलग हमारे जो वर्कर्स हैं, मतलब एग्रीकल्चर में है या अलग एम्प्लॉयमेंट में है, अलग अलग एरिया में जो हमारे लोग काम कर रहे हैं, वो अलग अलग सवाल या चैलेंजेस उनके सामने है। इसलिए पैंडेमिक टाइम ही नहीं, मगर पिछले जब से ये बीजेपी सत्ता में है तब से अब तक कि लोग अलग तरह से चैलेंजेस सामना कर रहे हैं, कि एक है इकोनॉमिक चैलेंज और दूसरा है उनके सामने सांस्कृतिक रूप का एक चैलेंज। सांस्कृतिक रूप का मतलब जहां लोग काम कर रहे हैं कि उनके बीच में सांप्रदायिक ताकत काम कर रहे हैं, कि एक तरफ इकोनॉमिक एजेंडा लेकर लड़ रहे हैं, मगर उसी समय ये सांप्रदायिक ताकत है ना, उनका ये जो लड़ने का ताकत है और रियल रूप से जो क्या करना चाहते हैं उससे डाइवर्ट कर रही है। ये चैलेंज पूरा दुनिया भर में, हम तो अब तक ऐसा लड़ते आए हैं बहुत सारे इसमें कि सिर्फ इकोनॉमिक एजेंडा लेकर लड़ रहे हैं, मगर अब इकोनॉमिक क्राइसिस भी बढ़ गया है सभी से, जो मध्यम वर्ग है, लोअर मध्यम वर्ग है, और जो गरीब लोग है, गांव में है या सिटी में है, अलग अलग रूप में कि लोग भयग्रस्त ऐसा है। एक है कि इकोनॉमिक क्राइसिस में, और दूसरा है कि कल्चरल क्राइसिस, कल्चरल रामा प्लीज, कि कल्चरल हमला उनके ऊपर जो हो रही है, ये उनके लिए बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज है। देखो ये कोरोना के समय में, ये कोरोना एक वैज्ञानिक रूप से एक्सप्लेन नहीं करे, इसलिए लोग गांवों में या स्लम में या अलग अलग इसमें क्या कर रहे हैं, एक तो कोरोना का एक देवी बनाकर उनका पूजा करने लगे। इसी समय में आरएसएस वालों ने, कि आरएसएस का आइडियोलॉजी वालों ने क्या करे कि उनका एक गाड़ी में होम हवन करने का एक ये रख लेके कि एरिया कॉलोनी मतलब एरिया गए हैं कि आप ये होम हवन करो कि कोरोना जाएगा। ये ऐसा आ गया कि अलग अलग वर्ग के लोगों के सामने ये सांस्कृतिक चैलेंज तो बहुत बड़ा है, और इसके साथ इकोनॉमिक चैलेंज भी बढ़ गया है कि लोग इसीलिए परेशान में है। देखो एलपीजी गैस का रेट कल से पहला 15 रुपया कम था, अब 15 रुपया भी बढ़ गया, अब 1000 रुपया तक हो गया। कि इसके लिए लड़ना, क्या एम्प्लॉयमेंट के लिए लड़ना, या ये सांस्कृतिक रूप से इनके ऊपर जो हमला हो रही है उसके रूप से लड़ना। मुझे एक इंफॉर्मेशन आया इसी 8 दिन के अंदर, सेंट्रल यूनिवर्सिटी में नेप की नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी के बारे में जो वर्कशॉप हो रही है, कार्यागार हो रही है, एक तो उद्घाटन करने के लिए एक बहिरंग अलग रहता है कि शाम में, दोपहर से शाम तक सभी प्रोफेसरों को बिठाकर कि ये कहते हैं, आरएसएस का फुल टाइमर्स को भेज रहे हैं, ये कहते हैं कि आपका सिलेबस जो इकोनॉमिक हो या टेक्नोलॉजी हो या सोशल का जो भी सब्जेक्ट हो, वो सब्जेक्ट को आपने अप्लाई करना रामायण महाभारत। रामायण महाभारत के समय में सब कुछ था, ये आप स्टूडेंट्स को बताओ। ये हमारे मेन हिंदुत्व का एक मुख्य सांस्कृतिक ये है, उन्हें कहते हैं। एक प्रोफेसर उठकर पूछे कि क्लासरूम में बच्चों को ऐसा विदाउट प्रूफ हम नहीं बता सकते कि इसका आधार क्या है, पूछे स्टूडेंट, सो हमें क्या बताना, कि वो जो बोलने के लिए आए थे वहां उन्होंने ऐसा उनको बिठाए, ये भारत का हिंदुओं का भावना है, ये भावना के ऊपर हमारे रामायण महाभारत है, ये आप कंपेयर करके उनको बताना और ज्यादा क्वेश्चन नहीं करना। ये हर जगह हो रही है और ये बहिरंग नहीं हो रही है। एनईपी के नाम पे जो बड़े बड़े यूनिवर्सिटीज या डिग्री कॉलेजेस हमने देख रहे हैं वहां चल रही है। ये देखो इतना चैलेंजेस हर एक जगह सामना करना पड़ रहे हैं कि हमने इकोनॉमिक रूप से भी हमें देखना पड़ेगा, एजुकेशन शैक्षणिक तौर पे भी हमें देखना पड़ेगा, और हमारे देश का ये जो सांस्कृतिक परंपरा है वो भी हमें हमारे सामने रख लेके हमने कि जो गवर्नमेंट का हमारे ऊपर हमला हो रही है उसको भी हमें सामना करना पड़ेगा। और इसके साथ महिला होकर, महिला जेंडर का जो अगर आप बजट देखना चाहते हैं वो बजट में भी कट हो गया, और महिला बोले तो एक देह के रूप में देखने का एक सांस्कृतिक दृष्टिकोण पुरुषों के दिमाग में डाल दिया है कि जहां भी हमारे कर्नाटक में पिछले 8 दिन में एक ही जिला में, यादगिरी जिला है, एक ही जिला में कि 5 महिलाओं के ऊपर अत्याचार हो गया, उनको बर्न करे और क्रूएल रूप से उनके ऊपर हमला करे और एक महिला को नंगा करके मारे और भाई उनके बहन के साथ अत्याचार हुआ। ये इश्यू लेकर हम लड़ रहे हैं, प्रेस वाले लिख रहे हैं, उसी समय और अत्याचार हो रही है कि देखो इतना इश्यूज हमारे सामने हो रही है। इसके साथ हमारे जो दलित लोग हैं कि आर्थिक रूप से थोड़ा सबल है, उनको वैदिक के तरफ खींच रहे हैं और ये लोग भी उनको बहुत बड़े समझकर उधर जा रहे हैं। इतना मतलब इतना क्रिटिक हो रही है, क्रिटिकल हो रही है, इतना लोगों के बीच में कंफ्यूज हो रही है कि हम कैसे तात्विक रूप से कौन सा आइडियोलॉजी लेकर हमें लड़ना है, इसमें भी बहुत सारे लोग कंफ्यूज है। तो एम्प्लॉयमेंट की बात है और कृषि एग्रीकल्चर की बात है, महिला की बात है, दलित की बात है, और जो लोग बात करना चाहते हैं उन्होंने चुप्पी से चुप हो रही है, ये सब है। तो एक रूप से पूरे देश में भयोत्पादन भी कर रहे हैं और दूसरे माइनॉरिटी के ऊपर हमला भी हो रही, इतना चैलेंजेस हमारे सामने है। तो मुझे लगता है इस चैलेंजेस को हमारे जिम्मेदारी क्या है और लोग क्या चाहते हैं, और इसके बीच में सोनिया जी ने जो उनका लैटिन अमेरिका का या उनका व्यूज, वहां का इंफॉर्मेशन हमें दिया है, इंडिया के लिए हमें कैसा काम करना है ये हमें समझ लेना बहुत जरूरी है। और मैं जिस एरिया में काम करती हूँ कि गाँव में मैं ज्यादा काम करती हूँ, हमारे गांव में लोग इकोनॉमिक क्राइसिस के साथ भी झेल रहे हैं और उसके साथ उससे बचाने के लिए उन्होंने भजन भी कर रहे हैं और उन्होंने ह्यूमैनिटी के रूप से भी कि लोगों के साथ रह रहे हैं। कोरोना के समय में हम देखे हैं, उनसे हमें सीखना भी बहुत है और उनके साथ रहना भी जरूरी है, और उनके साथ एक पॉलिटिकली क्लैरिटी के साथ एक पॉलिटिकल एजुकेशन का सिलेबस लेकर हमें उनके बीच में अलग सांस्कृतिक दृष्टिकोण से काम करना बहुत जरूरी है। मुझे ये लगा है अलग अलग समय में जो हमारे किसान लोग हैं, हमारे किसान अगर उनका एक कायदा के बारे में उनको हम एक्सप्लेन करने लगे तो उनको एक्सप्लेन करने के लिए अलग भाषा हमें इस्तेमाल करना पड़ता, क्योंकि उनके दिमाग में ये डाले है हमें विमोचन करने के लिए एक ऊपर है वो हमारे मोदी है, मगर उनको विमोचन करने के लिए क्या है, खुद किसान सभी का विमोचन करने वाले बोलने के लिए हमें इस जमीन का कई सांस्कृतिक परंपरा है उसको जोड़कर हमें एक्सप्लेन करना पड़ता। मुझे लगता है इकोनॉमिक क्राइसिस से, इकोनॉमिक हमला को हम जो फेस कर रहे हैं, प्रतिरोध कर रहे हैं, उसके साथ हमने ये भी एजेंडा इंपॉर्टेंट समझना जरूरी है। लोगों के दिमाग और लोगों के ये जो वेन है ना, उसको हम पकड़ना जरूरी है। तो ऐसा ये बहुत सारे चैलेंजेस हमारे सामने है। और मैं एक बात कहना चाहती हूँ कि पैंडेमिक के समय में जो लोग आ गए, माइग्रेट होके वापस आ गए, वापस आए सो लोग 30 to 40% उनके गांव में रह गए हैं। उनका एक अलग हमें सर्वे करना पड़ता, अलग रूप से उनके साथ हमें बात करना पड़ता, और उनके जो एम्प्लॉयमेंट का समस्या है और उनका जो भावना है, उनका जो फैमिली का स्ट्रक्चर है, उनका जो स्किल है, वो सब हमने कि समाज के सामने और सत्ता के सामने रखना जरूरी है। रखते समय उनका एक जो अस्तित्व है, उनका जो एक रेवोल्यूशनरी माइंड है, डेफिनेटली मैं ये शब्द इस्तेमाल कर रही हूँ, हमारे जो कामकाज लोगों के मन में एक रेवोल्यूशनरी थिंकिंग है, एक प्रतिरोध धारा है। वो प्रतिरोध धारा को ट्यूनिंग करने का जरूरी है, ट्यूनिंग करने का। अगर वो ट्यूनिंग करके इकोनॉमिक भी एजेंडा लेकर हम लड़ने के लिए अलग ढांचा, अलग भूमिका हम तैयार करें, तो लोग ये जो सत्ता का हमला है इसका प्रतिरोध करते हैं। और एक पार्लियामेंट्री सिस्टम में डेफिनेटली उनका जो अभिव्यक्त करना है ना, वोट के स्वरूप में जो मत डालते हैं ना, मत बैंक में उनका वोट डालते हैं ना, उस स्वरूप में भी बदलाव आ जाएगा। ये तो प्रयोग है, अलग अलग रूप का ये प्रयोग है कि जिस एरिया में हम प्रयोग करे हैं, वहां रिजल्ट अगर हम देखते हैं तो अच्छा रिजल्ट है। जैसा कर्नाटक में हमारा एरिया है, हैदराबाद कर्नाटक एरिया, एक तरफ आंध्र प्रदेश है, एक तरफ महाराष्ट्र है। हम उस दोनों का एक कल्चरल मिलावट हमारे साथ है, भाषा भी वैसा है हमारा। कन्नड़ बोले तो उसके साथ उर्दू है, हिंदी है, तेलुगु है, मराठी है। इसीलिए गोदताई पर लेकर हमें बहुत हमारे ही घर के हमारे कॉमरेड लगता है, क्योंकि कर्नाटक के साथ उनके जुड़े हुए हैं गोदताई परोलेकर का जिंदगी। तो इसीलिए ये सब चैलेंजेस हमारे सामने जो है, हमारे स्टूडेंट्स, हमारे यूथ ये अलग रूप से सर्वे करके एक अध्ययन करना जरूरी है, स्टडी करना जरूरी है। मुझे ये संशोधन कहना चाहती हूँ मैं, संशोधन करना जरूरी है। और प्रदेश, एक प्रदेश से दूसरा प्रदेश अलग होती है, ये अलग अलग रूप पे हमने स्टडी करके एक चैलेंजेस को हमने फेस करना जरूरी है। और मेरा आखिर ये बात कहना चाहती हूँ, जो भी हमारे प्रयोग है और जो भी हमारे ये सब बातें हैं, हम जनता के साथ जोड़कर बात करना जरूरी है। जो सत्ता की बात है, जो इंटरनेशनल का ये जो कॉर्पोरेट्स का, कम्युनलिज्म का, फैसिज्म का और ये नव वसाहतुकरण का, उदारीकरण का ये जो भी बातें हैं, साम्राज्यशाही का बातें हैं, कि हमारे लोगों के भाषा में उनके साथ हमें डायलॉग करना पड़ता। मुझे गोदताई पर लेकर का मैं याद करना चाहती हूँ, आदिवासियों के बीच में जब काम करते थे गोदताई पर लेकर, कि वापस आने के बाद गोदताई पर लेकर और उनके बाल संगाती कॉमरेड ने बैठकर, साथियों ने बैठकर शब्द का अलग डिक्शनरी उन्होंने करते थे। आदिवासियों के साथ बात करने के लिए ये शब्द जरूरी है और ये एटीट्यूड जरूरी है, ये कल्चरली उनका ये अलग है। इसीलिए हमारे देश में, हमारे एरिया में अलग अलग भाषा है, अलग अलग कल्चरल का धारा है, उसका अलग अलग रूप से हमें स्टडी करना जरूरी है और हमारे मूवमेंट उसके साथ जोड़ना जरूरी है। हमें अगर ऐसा नहीं जोड़ सकते तो हम आज जो हम फेस कर रहे हैं, ये सब चैलेंजेस हमारे सामने है, हम उसको एड्रेस नहीं कर सकते। ये मेरा ओपिनियन है।
थैंक यू कॉमरेड, आपने मतलब हमको काफ़ी कोरोना महामारी से भी अच्छा रियलिटी कनेक्ट करवाया। अभी हम दूसरा क्वेश्चन लेते हैं। दूसरा क्वेश्चन है, एक सेकेंड, Leah Rodrigues is asking, I think this is for Professor Sonia. So, for the president of Argentina, Alberto Fernandez, the actions of the Lima Group have caused an isolation of the government of Venezuela at the international level that has not served any purpose, which is why he made the decision to withdraw his country off that organization. So, I think this is, you're on mute again. This is more of a...
Yeah, Leah, I think it's a comment and
It's a comment, yeah.
Yes.
There's another question by her itself. which says, do you both see a clear perspective of articulation between women from Latin America and India? I mean, women organizations, etc.
I think this is an absolutely important question because, you see, we don't understand Latin America. Leah, no sé si estás. I'm asking Leah if she's around. But this is a very, very important question. And why this is important is that though our paths may be different, and though our models may have to be different, the way we resist and way we organize ourselves might be different. But the fact is that we don't even know each other. You see, I want to share with you all that, I was reading once again. It has always bothered me, but I meant to ask you all. And so I was reading, The Awakening of Man by Godutai Parulekar, in the English translation, which I think came out just very recently. And the translator, who's done such a wonderful job of the translation, writes that, he's constantly talking che, but in a very disparaging tone. And he says that, that it makes more enduring and better model for the modern age than the bloody warfare waged by Che. Now, this is the propaganda against Che. We don't even understand, what Che and Fidel did in the 1950s in the case of Cuba. So what I'm trying to say is, here is a person who's done a wonderful translation of Godavari Parulekar's book. Obviously, this is a person who's committed to people's cause, but I think the propaganda, the narrative rather about, Latin American processes, whether it is the 60s or now, is so virulent. Today we know that this is a hybrid war, and that media war is a big part, through WhatsApp, through social media, is a big part of this war which is being waged against people. We see it in our own country. So when you say that, is there a possibility of an articulation between women from Latin America and India, I think it is absolutely imperative that we have people-to-people contact, that we understand each other better, because otherwise we will have very erroneous conceptions about each other, which would be mediated by the dominant rich press. Our issues are same. If you look at Mexico, Chile, Argentina, where Leah comes from, the massive number of rapes that happen every day, the way the women are organizing themselves against this rape culture, I think we have so many commonalities, even about the economic challenges that our women's movement faces, that I think Comrade Neela would actually be able to answer this perhaps better, whether we have our international linkages, whether we actually think of linking our women's movement theoretically and otherwise with the women's movement in Latin America. I think it's absolutely imperative that we start having these links.
Absolutely. Okay, so we are close to we are close to 2 hours. So we can take like one last question, because we have a lot of questions, and yeah. Okay. So this question is by Asika. Hi, ma'am. Is it possible to think in emancipatory projects in Latin America without strategies of power incorporating the questions of dualizing the bourgeoisie power and or overthrowing the ruling classes?
You see, you have to operate within the bourgeois state structure. Neither in Venezuela nor in any of these countries have you been able to actually change the nature of the state. And what do you do in such a situation? In such a situation, you see, another thing that I want to tell you is, this is not something which has been decided by some leaders from top. What is happening today, even this dual power, this has a long history of struggle of the people. So, for example, in Venezuela, if we are talking about dual power in Venezuela, the communal councils. It's not as though suddenly Chavez came and he passed a law. Of course, it was his, as we say, durdrishti. It was his keen insight into the, what direction the Bolivarian process should take at a particular time, which is when he felt, this was 2012. He felt that if the process had to be deepened, then it had to be through socialist democracy of popular power. So he gave the communal council a legal constitutional mechanism, but in other places, for example, in Bolivia, etc., some other structures are there. What is important is that whether it is redistribution of wealth, whether it is any one of these programs, none of them have actually happened in Latin America from a top-down approach. Now, I'm not talking about new institutionalism and good governance, or for that matter, workers' cooperatives. What is happening there in the name of dual power it is actually something extremely different. It is the political power of people. It is the political power of people. People are deciding. People are deciding. And that, I think, is absolutely fascinating. The fact that even in a party leadership, it is not the leaders who can take all the decisions. There are popular assemblies. The amendments are discussed. And let me tell you, in Cuba too. In Cuba, there was a debate competition with the Department of Economics of Jamia held. They invited me as a jury, as a judge. And one of the girls who spoke really well, it was about democracy. And in order to talk about dictators, the two examples that she mentioned was Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez. While these are the two countries where democracy, the deepest form of democracy in the entire Latin America exists. In Cuba, they've just done a new constitution, which took months of discussion, because the Cubans are no fools. Cubans are, they have 100% literacy. And they discussed it. That it so happens that there is a single party, system there, but that doesn't mean that there is no democracy. And therefore, I think to overthrow the ruling classes, the strategies of power in each one of these are different. But one thing is clear, that what all of them are attempting is to have autonomous space of popular power. So politically empowering people, not through within the state, but in autonomous parallel structures. I don't know if I've answered your question, Nasika, but yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, we will go. We'll move on, and we at PSF would really like to thank you, Comrade Neela and Professor Sonia, for joining us today for the third Godavari Parulekar Memorial Lecture. And we are delighted to have you for the lecture and help us understand the larger struggle in Latin America and in India. Also extending greetings to all the viewers who joined us today for the lecture. And the lecture will also be uploaded on our YouTube channel, that is PSF Dis. Once again, many thanks, Professor Sonia and Comrade Neela, for joining us today. Also, we wish that we will meet you all for the next Godavari Parulekar Memorial Lecture. And thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a great evening.
Thank you.